What's happening, everyone? I'm James Lynch, and this is Early Look. On today's edition, we're going to be previewing the flyweight title fight as part of UFC 290 in the co-main event between champion Brandon Moreno and Alexandre Pantoja. You can see it there, co-main event. Really exciting fight. There's some history between these two. We'll get into that in a second here. But let's have a quick look at the tail of the tape between these two fighters here. Brandon Moreno, the champion, you can see there, 21-6-2. Alexandre Pantoja, 25-5. 29 years old for Moreno, 33 for Pantoja, 5'7" to 5'5", 70-inch reach to 68. If you've never watched the show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles, and then I'm going to give you my pick at the end. Some of this stuff may have relevance, it may not, but I like to look at every little angle when it comes to previewing these fights. So let's start first with the champion, Brandon Moreno. You can see there, I talked about some of the stuff already with Moreno. You can see it there, 21-6-2. He's got 5 knockouts, 11 submissions, and 5 decisions. He's 29 years old, 5'7" with a 70-inch reach. So he's 3 years younger than Pantoja. He's got a 2-inch height and 2-inch reach advantage. He is a BJJ black belt. His last fight against Deiveson Figueiredo, he trained at Fortis MMA. Doesn't look like he's training there this time around. I see a lot of photos in Las Vegas. Seems like he's having a bit of a custom camp out there in Vegas for this one. Not sure if he will get to work with Coach Safe this time around, but we'll see if that pays off or doesn't pay off. We'll see what happens in the matchup. Moreno, like I mentioned, the current flyweight champion. He's done that 2 times already. He's also was the 1-time interim flyweight champion. He's got fight of the night 3 times against Deiveson Figueiredo, twice, and Kai Kara France. He's also got performance of the night 3 times against Dustin Ortiz, Luis Smolka, and Deiveson Figueiredo. He's the first Mexican UFC champion, Mexican born, I should say. Cain Velasquez, obviously Mexican, was born in the US, so a bit of a different story there. Brandon Moreno did not have an amateur debut. He went straight to the pros in April of 2011. Made his UFC debut in October of 2016. He's 9-3 in the UFC. He's got 5 stoppage victories. He's also got 2 draws as well. We'll talk about those in a sec. Some notable wins for Moreno include, let's go through them right now, shall we? Kai Kara France, he's got 2 wins over Kai. So those were pretty impressive. He's also got wins over Brandon Royval, UC Formiga, who is ranked at the time. He's got 2 wins over Deiveson Figueiredo. And yeah, those are some pretty notable victories he's got there. Some notable losses include Sergio Pettis, the Bellator bantamweight champion, Alexandre Pantoja, who he's fighting in this matchup. And then obviously Deiveson Figueiredo just has the 1 loss there as well. One of the things with Moreno, pretty active. The only layoff he's had was the layoff that he had going from Sergio Pettis to Alexandre Pantoja. There was a 287-day layoff. But Brandon Moreno, pretty active guy, fighting at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. No major injuries that have forced him out of any fights. You see these Ray Borg things. That was all Ray Borg, as we know. Not very dependable when it comes to making fights. Moreno's had a couple close fights. Let's talk about the draw he had against Askar Askarov. It was a split draw. Went back and looked at the media scorecards for that one, and that can be found on MMADecisions.com. You can always find the media scorecards there. As far as the media scorecards for that one, 12 media members scored the fight for Moreno, 1 scored it for Askarov. So a lot of people feeling like that should have been a win for Brandon Moreno. Now let's talk about the UC Formiga fight. 2 fights after. That was back at UFC on ESPN Plus 28 back in March of 2020. 5 media members scoring the fight for Moreno, 8 scoring it for UC Formiga. So how different things could have looked if he got a loss in that one. Doesn't end up happening. He gets the judge's nod there. Let's also talk about the draw he had with Deiveson Figueiredo. That was at UFC 256 in December of 2020. 13 media members scoring the fight for Figueiredo, 14 scoring it a draw. So again, some people feeling like maybe Moreno should have lost that fight. And then there is the loss to Deiveson Figueiredo that they had in the rematch, UFC 270, January 2022. 17 media members scored the fight for Figueiredo, 8 scoring it for Moreno. So again, people feeling like the judges did get that one right. Let's go back to the Ultimate Fighter 24, the first fight that Brandon Moreno lost to Alexandre Pantoja. It doesn't technically count. You can see it there as an exhibition bout. That was the first stoppage loss, the only stoppage loss that Moreno's had in his career, although they don't count it, like I said, because it's an exhibition fight. Ended up going back to watch that one. Some interesting things about that season, of course. Henry Cejudo wanted Brandon Moreno on his team. They were training together at the time. Pantoja ends up on his team instead, and Pantoja having to fight Brandon Moreno, and Cejudo not being a part of this fight because he didn't want to obviously corner against Brandon Moreno, which I thought was interesting. Doesn't have any impact on this fight. Just thought I'd mention that as a sort of thing there. And Pantoja was one of the top picks on the season. Moreno one of the lowest picks. Moreno surprised a lot of people in that fight. If you go back and watch that first round, Moreno actually landed a series of overhand punches. Looked really good early on. Towards the end of the round, Pantoja seemed to have found his footing, but you see that first round, his face is bloodied up a bit. Moreno had a lot of success there, which was interesting. Now, That end of round 1 sort of translated into round 2 as well. Pantoja was able to compose himself in the first 5 minutes with Moreno of that second round. The key thing there was the takedown. Pantoja goes for it. Instead of sprawling away, Moreno makes a mistake, gives up his back, ends up getting submitted. Again, it's the only time that Moreno's ever been finished in his career, and a disappointing result, but it was one of those fights where we saw the promise of Brandon Moreno at the time. Again, a lot of people counting him out. Looked good early on in that fight against Pantoja. Now, the second fight they had back in 2018, probably the worst performance of Brandon Moreno's career if you go back and sort of look at everything that he's done. That first round was definitely a 10-8. I went back and watched the fight. Moreno very bloody early on in that fight. 10-8 Pantoja, 10-9 Pantoja, 10-9 Pantoja is how I scored that one. And that was the fight that the UFC, it was also like, this kid needs some more work. So they actually released him. I remember at the time people being like, why did they release him? Actually, I think that was the time too, they released a lot of flyweights, but Moreno was one of them. And you can sort of understand that, after that showing, maybe they wanted him to work on things a little bit more. So he just had the one fight against Michael Perez for LFA, and then he was brought right back to the UFC there. So that's one thing to think of. Moreno, one of his worst performances coming against Pantoja was enough to get cut. And, now he's back and now he's the champion. So it just goes to show that anything can happen. Let's look at some quick stats here for Brandon Moreno. We always like to look at UFCstats.com. You can see the significant strikes landed per minute is 3.55. His striking accuracy is at 40%. His striking defense is at 56%, so he does get hit a bit. And his takedown defense is at 67%. So Moreno does get hit a lot, but he's fighting a guy in Pantoja who I would argue does not have the same power that Deiveson Figueiredo has. So we'll see, but obviously he's got the good ground game as well. So that's everything you need to know about Brandon Moreno. Again, we'll see if he can ride this momentum of the big win he had in his last fight over Deiveson Figueiredo. But let's talk about his opponent, shall we? Alexandre Pantoja. He's the number 2 ranked flyweight. You can see there. He is 25-5. He's got 8 knockouts, 10 submissions, and 7 decisions. He's 33 years old. He's 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. So no advantages on paper in terms of, age or experience or height or anything like that. Does come from a good camp though at American Top Team. Like Moreno, Alexandre Pantoja did not have an amateur debut. Went straight to the pros in July of 2007. Made his UFC debut in January of 2017. Defeating Eric Shelton by split decision. He's 9-3 in the UFC. He's got 6 stoppage wins. Some notable wins include Brandon Moreno, Kai Kara France. The France win was on The Ultimate Fighter. Brandon Moreno, Wilson Hayes, Minal Kopp, Brandon Royval, and most recently, Alex Perez. He's had a couple layoffs, most recently in his last 2 fights. Going from Royval to Perez, there was a 343-day layoff. And then going from Perez to Moreno, there'll also be a 343-day layoff. So big layoff coming into this fight. Brandon Moreno, a lot more active. And just to give a little bit of context here. If you look at 2021, he did fight 2 times that year. But if you look at it since the start of February of 2021, Brandon Moreno has fought 4 times. Pantoja only fighting, 3 times. So not as big of a deal. But if you look at it there, Moreno last fought earlier this year and then fought in July before that. Pantoja fought in July and then fought the year before that. So Pantoja, a little bit of a layoff coming into this one. Pantoja's had some injuries. That's actually what's been keeping him out so long with those gaps in between fights, but nothing that's forced him out of a fight. Actually pretty active prior to the last 2 fights. He's had a couple close fights. We're going to mention those right now. The Dustin Ortiz loss, that was at UFC 220 back in January of 2018. 14 media members scored the fight for Ortiz, 3 scoring it a draw, and 3 scoring it for Pantoja. Again, majority feel like the decision was right there. And then there's the Minal Kopp fight, which a lot of people mention, maybe that could have gone the other way. Went back and looked at the media scorecards for that one. That was at UFC Fight Night. Back in February of 2021. 17 media members scored the fight for Pantoja. Not a single media member scored the fight for Minal Kopp. So that's a good win. I mean, that's aged very well, that win. Actually, these last 3 fights have aged quite well. Maybe not Perez so much, but Royval and Kopp, 2 really, really big wins there. Let's go to some Pantoja stats here, shall we? You can see there, significant strikes landed per minute is 4.25. His striking accuracy is at 48%. His significant striking defense is at 54%. And his takedown defense is at 67%. So all good stats overall. We do not have betting lines on this fight yet. Just went and looked. It's not available yet on Best Fight Odds. We'll be waiting for those, but you can see how people are picking on Tapology. 63% picking Moreno, 37% picking Pantoja. So this is tricky because, again, we have seen before when fighters have those wins, like even with Alex Pereira in kickboxing, maybe it did have a mental edge in him defeating Adesanya the first time in the UFC. So that could be a factor in this fight. We'll have to see. But I think the biggest thing that I want to kind of emphasize here is that I feel like Pantoja's kind of been the same fighter, like not in a bad way. Like he's a very talented guy. He's always been near the top of the weight class, but he's had a couple key losses that really make me wonder if he's able to get it done. Now, granted, these were a couple of years ago. The Figueiredo fight clearly lost that. Clearly lost the Askarov fight, like I mentioned, Dustin Ortiz. I mean, he's not having a lot of losses, but it's enough where it's like, okay, he probably should have been Askarov. He probably should have been beat for Figueiredo if we're feeling more confident here. But then you look at some of the wins he's had recently, very impressive wins. The thing to me, though, is that Moreno has improved so much since they fought back in 2018. It's almost like you're getting a different fighter in this matchup. And I think the other thing you got to look at with Moreno, despite the fact he's taken a ton of damage, he's a guy that has not been knocked out. I mean, Deiveson Figueiredo wasn't able to do it. Now, I think Moreno was did benefit a bit with the fact that he was fighting a guy in Figueiredo who really is cutting way too much weight. And I think that, led to the fact that Moreno is a true flyweight, was able to, well, I shouldn't say, they're both true flyweights, but Moreno not having to cut as much weight. He's actually fighting a guy in Pantoja who's not cutting as much weight as Deiveson Figueiredo. So I think that's actually an advantage for Pantoja going into this fight. But the thing is, Moreno's tough to finish. Even in that fight that he had against Pantoja on The Ultimate Fighter, it was a mistake that caused him to lose that fight. Now, could that happen in this fight? It possibly could. But I just think Moreno's improved so much since they fought back in 2018. And I'm not seeing the same thing from Pantoja. I think this new version of Moreno does beat Alexandre Pantoja. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think the odds are going to be close on this fight. And I think a lot of people are going to reference the fact that Pantoja, has those 2 wins already. And he's looked great. But to me, Moreno's been a little bit more active. And I think he's improved a little bit more here. And I think his durability will lead him to winning a decision here. Not to mention the fact, 5-round experience, that definitely favors Moreno as well. This is a tougher fight to call, but I am going to go Brandon Moreno by decision to get it done. I don't think he finishes Pantoja. You look at Pantoja in general, his losses have all been decision, right? Even on The Ultimate Fighter, that loss he had, decision loss, never been stopped in the UFC. I don't think it's going to be easy. And if you look at Moreno, yeah, he's got some stoppage wins. But, you look at this one, it was an eye injury doctor stoppage, although I think he probably was on his way to finishing him. The France finish was good. Figueiredo was good, that third fight as well. But I don't know. I think if a finish does happen, I think another play to look at in this fight is the over. It's going to be 5 rounds, but I think if Moreno does get a finish, it'll be later. But I'm still going to side go on the side of Moreno decision. I think that's likely how this plays out. I think he gets it done, but I think Moreno gets it done. Yeah, like I said, I think he's been looking a little bit more improved than Pantoja over the last couple of fights. Not to mention he's younger, so I don't even think he's in the prime of his career yet. I think he's just entering that. I think with Pantoja, he is in the prime of his career, and I think with him coming off a big layoff, that's enough for me to go the other way. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking in this fight? Are you going with Pantoja? Does he have his number? Or do you think Brandon Moreno gets it done? Also, let me know if there's any other fights you want me to preview that are coming up. Doesn't have to be a main event or title fight. Just let me know if there's something you want me to preview here. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.